Good morning. It's Thursday, February 18th. And yesterday I was looking through some reading materials and I discovered an article that said Homeland Security vowed to fight domestic terrorism. And so I started to do some research on domestic terrorism. And of course, the one place that I went to look was Google. So I click on Google and I get sent to a page that's called White Supremacist Groups in the United States. This, of course, is part of Wikipedia. So I'm expecting to find a couple of the classic ones like the Ku Klux Klan and some neo-Nazi organizations, and the Proud Boys, and maybe the Oath Takers. But what do you think I found? I found 64 different groups that fell into the category of white supremacist. Now, in my mind, there are more groups that may fall outside the realm of white supremacists that could be considered domestic terrorist groups. So then I go on a search for the domestic terrorist groups. And within the domestic terrorist groups, I find a few of the white supremacist groups. But I find a bunch of other groups like the Army of God and the Jewish Defense League and the Weatherman and the Symbionese Liberation Army. That's what I'm finding. And these groups fall into several different categories. There are groups that are anti-abortion, and they practice anti-abortion violence. And then you got eco-terrorism. And then you got radicalized lynching behavior and terror. And then you have the right-wing extremist groups. But then we also have left-wing extremist groups. And we have anarchist groups and communists and the green ecological factions. The nationalist groups. And then there are religious groups that are singled out, like Buddhist and Christian and Mormon and evangelical. Then I'm looking at something else and I find the structure of these groups, which is fascinating. These old groups are all well-financed, and they have fronts that seem to be normal, that suck people in. And then they all have some form of radicalization, mainly online. And then there are training camps and death squads. And they have lone wolves out there. Many of these groups have a lone wolf. And they're kind of a leaderless resistance. And when I looked further, I found terrorist groups listed as foundations, listed as charities, raising money in the United States, and they are listed by the FBI as a terrorist group. Like the Global Relief Foundation, that's listed as a terrorist group identified by the FBI. And then we have the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development, and that's also listed as a terrorist group by the FBI. And then there's the Benevolence International Foundation, which is also listed by the FBI as a terrorist organization. So here we are, the start of a new regime in the United States, and we are confronted with domestic terrorism. It is a huge, huge problem. These organizations that are listed as domestic terrorists are well-financed. I could not find any information on the size of the domestic terrorist population or the white supremacist population or the population of any organization that was practicing bigotry of some kind or other. But I can tell you this, that in the Congress And in the Senate, there were over 60 resolutions prepared and passed and are in holding and are being reviewed to deal with domestic terrorism. 60 different actions taken by the Congress and the Senate. So they recognize the problem that exists in this country. Now, I'm sure that many of them are looking at the problem correctly, but there are many in Congress and in the Senate who view certain groups not as terrorists, but as loyal members of their flock. And that's a big problem. That is the big problem that we are facing in this country. That there are many members of our government who don't consider certain forms of divisive action inappropriate. So as I look at the overall picture, I see a polarized state of American politics combined with the activities of social media networks causing these isolated hate groups to connect and coordinate. Now, where do we start to solve the problem? I don't believe that we can get rid of the social networks that easily. I think we have to start with the polarized politics in this country. We have to get together and decrease the divisiveness that has gone on in this country for far too long. We see terrorism from the far right that has outpaced the terrorism from some other sides. True, we have a far left network, and then we have individuals from outside the country who are messing in our politics. This is the opportunity to get together and solve these problems. So I'm hoping that we have a new broom in charge, and that we will be able to sweep a lot of this dirt out of our so-called house. And let us hope that the people who are now in charge can rise to the occasion and put a stop to the nonsense that is running through this country. The QAnon organizations, the Proud Boys, the Aryan Nation, the neo-Nazis, the American Nazi Party, the Oath Takers, all of those groups have to be gotten under control. Maybe they only represent 1% of the population, but that's still a significant number. That's too much hate to have running around this country. So I will leave you with those thoughts now. Have a great day. I understand snow is coming. Must be a bitch living in Texas without electricity right now. Anyhow, I'll see you in the morning. Bye.